Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck.
Greetings.
Now, among your many virtues and assets and accomplishments, you are an attorney, an historian, and you follow the Supreme Court, as I understand that.
I'm not a follower of the court. The court watchers are a very interesting genre of people who focus in like a laser on it. I wouldn't put myself in that category, but I do generally follow. I do constitutional law.
Yes,
so.
not altogether a bad, I guess, direction to go in life, to watch the Supreme Court in action, particularly as there's a rather conservative majority, I guess one could say, on the Supreme Court, and so a lot of issues are finding their way to the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. And one of them of consequence is the case that's now before the court, which is the ability of President Biden to arbitrarily dismiss about $500 billion in student loans. And I'm going to pass the baton to you on this, but I think the major points of contention would be that the courts, the standing of the people bringing the issue before the Supreme Court might not be enough, and the other issue might be that the president has usurped the power of Congress in arbitrarily dismissing this $500 billion and passing the debt on to other taxpayers.
Yes.
So I'll let you bounce the basketball.
Well, I will begin by asking who the plaintiffs are in this case. Are they members of Congress who have gotten teed off about this?
I think there are the individual states, is my understanding, and the reason for that is the states have some relationship with the way the money is dispensed.
Yeah, there are about 10 different attorneys general, I think, who have combined
right. Yes.
Well, the outlier of constitutional law, if you're going to bring a case within the federal court system, is what is called the case and controversy clause of the Constitution. You find this in Article 3. Article 3 is the judicial power, which tells you ultimately what jurisdiction the federal courts have and what jurisdiction they don't. Just about every type of situation in which the courts have jurisdiction are regulated by what is called, and it's not really a single clause, but the phrases you hear over and over again in Article 3 are cases and controversies. And from this, the federal courts, in determining what their jurisdiction is, have decided that there actually has to be some sort of material issue between parties. And there are 4 or 5 categories that immediately the court would say, no, sorry, no go. These are standing, rightness, mootness, advisory opinions, and political questions. And
standing. That 5, but okay.
Yeah, I think so. Did I say 5, 4, 5, something like that? So some people would argue they all ultimately boil down to 1.
Yes.
But standing would be that the plaintiff have suffered some sort of actual injury that can be redressed by the judicial process. So, for instance, an example of standing, a case in which standing would be lacking is, let's suppose you, heaven forbid, get into a traffic accident with somebody from the state of Florida. So you've got diversity of citizenship, which would normally be good enough to get you into the federal court. But I sue on your behalf. I sue the other driver from Florida. The court's going to say, I have no standing. I'm not the injured party here. I'm not the aggrieved party. You would have standing. You've been injured. You could bring a lawsuit. Yes. But I have not suffered suffered it. And if there's, now you could say that perhaps you owe me money, and if you die without being insured, but the court's going to at some point say that's too remote. That's too bad for me.
Now, in this case, I mean, just the way this is going, apparently One of the Supreme Court justices is bringing up the standing issue, presumably with a reason to support the president on this, a Democratic appointee, and it's bad that we say that, is that it's a Republican justice and a Democratic justice.
It's terrible that we say that, and yet it seems
seems
more
to
and
be,
more true.
Well, I
all
mean,
the time.
it seems like an appropriate observation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if all the Democrats say one thing and all the Republicans say another.
Yes.
Well,
and if I could take us off the rails for just a minute there, there's always been a little of that, but it's never been as pronounced now. One fascinating thing is that throughout most of the court's history, and especially in the past 70 or 80 years, that it's quite a normal thing for Republican appointees to shift to the left.
Yes.
It is a very rare thing for Democratic appointees to shift to the right.
Yes.
Classical example is Earl Warren, one of the most famous, or some would say the most notorious Chief Justices ever during the great civil rights and civil liberties era, appointed, of course, by Republican President Dwight Eisenhower, who later on went on record as saying, worst damn appointment I ever made. But with the latest crop that we've seen over the last 15 years or so, you
Yes.
haven't been seeing that drift to the left. The one big possible standout is Chief Justice Roberts himself, who has who sees himself as a centrist, whatever
Yes.
that is, who of course was a Bush appointee.
Now-
But you're right; it's Democrat. So I'm right there with you, and I think that's a tragedy.
It is. So it is. I mean, really, we could go into that situation a
Yes.
lot. But back to the subject before us, getting in the courtroom. Is that you have to clear the hurdle to say, well, you have standing. So if a person, once the case is before the court, is that an argument to someone could say, well, a terrible mistake was made granting standing in this case, and presumably there's been someone's jumped over the hurdle
Yes.
to get in the courtroom.
Well, at least at the lower courts have decided that the hurdle has been cleared.
Well, the Supreme
Yeah.
Court has apparently gone along with that. I mean, to get in the courtroom, is that a valid reason to say, well, sorry, a terrible mistake was made to even hear the case?
Not exactly. There are three ways the court can hear the case. They can hear a case on original jurisdiction, which is very rare, but that's, for instance, if one state government sues another state government. The second way, which is actually pretty rare itself these days, is by appeal, when you actually have a right to appeal a case up to the court. And then the third way, which is almost the universal way today, is what you might call discretionary review. Lawyers have a fancy word for that, certiorari or certiorari. But it means that the court can decide whether or not the case is meritorious enough to hear. And the court can decide that on many different grounds. It can decide, well, all of the federal courts of appeal are going off in different directions, and we need to bring some sort of harmony to it and some sort of national rule that we're all on the same page, or there's a precedent that has showed that with the passage of time it just doesn't work anymore, or what have you. But the granting of cert or certiorari is not necessarily an admission that the court can find this justiciable, that the court is admitting that there is standing. In fact, the court may wish to grant cert in order to drive home the point that there isn't standing in a
Yes.
case of this sort.
Yes.
So
Yes.
that may be the situation we've got here.
Well, that seems to be the argument to support the president, speaking in broadest possible terms. The other reason the Republicans seemingly are going to reverse the president's decision is that he's intruded into the power of Congress, and that Congress has the ability to, I guess, they're the people that guard the cash box, so to speak, and allow whatever hand goes in the cash box to get in the cash box. And so that's the idea. The president has overstepped his power, and this particular case is a huge one, and the courts are enmeshed in that. But in general, isn't this a normal situation with the increase, the imperial presidency, the president constantly pushing the envelope with his power, and his advisors persuading him to do that? I mean, do you have any comments about that? That tripartite balance that's in the Constitution, how difficult it is to maintain it. Do you have any comments on that?
Yes, we have to remember that the executive branch, in terms of warm bodies, and not even counting the military, which is technically part of the executive branch, but not even counting the military, the executive branch is by far the biggest. There are literally millions of unelected federal employees who are in charge of or working for one federal program or one federal bureau or agency or another. That almost didn't exist until the early 20th century, and now there's something like 4 million of them. And with that, you get what the military might call mission creep. They like to get their hands in everything. The curious fact is, though, that all of these bureaus, the FAA, the FCC, the Food and Drug Administration, the Federal Reserve, all of these actually have to be authored and created and authorized by Congress. Congress has to pass a law establishing these things. And so theoretically, Congress can turn around and abolish them or decide exactly how much authority they have and how much authority they don't have. But from day to day, they operate under the auspices of the presidency. So you've got now almost a fourth branch of government, the unelected bureaucracy. As I understand it, in this case, aside from the standing issue, but assuming we clear the standing hurdle, which you may want to go back to that, but just while I'm on a roll here, the language, and I'm not sure whether it's statutory language passed by Congress, I think it is, or regulatory language passed by the agency administering these loans in the first place. I think the operative language says that given certain emergencies or certain problematic circumstances, the executive branch has the authority to modify these loan repayments and indebtedness and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What Biden has done is just engage in cancellation, or presumed to do is engage in cancellation of forgiveness. And so the argument now is that there's a big difference between modifying and just saying not going to do it, and that has moved beyond the authority that Congress granted to the executive branch.
Now, this is rather, I know you're a professor and you teach, and our whole university system in many ways, you could say yes or no about this, but it depends on the largesse of the government granting scholarships, forgiveness of different kinds of obligations to obtain a university education. And that's people that receive that are really doing something for themselves and society. So it's in society's best interest generally to have an educated group of citizens, and the more education, presumably, the better they'll do. And so the government is pumped huge amounts of money into the educational system. And this is a lot of money, $500 billion, that really have been lent by the government fiat to people that would need it. Besides that, there are huge numbers of scholarships. There are all kinds of methodologies by which the government is encouraging the university system. And critics of this would say, well, I hope you won't take offense to this, but the university system is bloated. It's putting up, I don't know what, climbing walls or bowling alleys or whatever else, 5-star meals, whatever it is, I don't know, saunas, whatever the story is.
I must say, I got to interject there.
Maybe I'm overstating.
No, I agree with you about the bloat, but if somebody's having 5-star meals, I'm not one of them.
Well, that's the hyperbole that enters into these conversations.
I think this is where you get professors versus administrators.
Well, you get the hyperbole of what's up here. And a lot of this depends, and there's a big argument that you could segue into what's the appropriate methodology by which our citizens find their way into the world. Do they get a niche in life, a billet somewhere? How useful for the citizen and for society? How do we get that accomplished? Education's a big deal. And it's extremely expensive, and I'd say generally in European countries, Western European, the state assumes the financial responsibility of doing that. It's not the case here. And the expenses are extraordinary. And I guess private elite universities, or indeed just private universities, it costs easily $100,000 a year. Well, it's a big number, but it can, let's say that, with everything tossed in there. People get huge debts, and it really has an impact on their whole life situation. So what seemingly has happened with the president doing this, and I would say, I won't say that politicians act for political reasons, but it could be that played a role.
You're saying a lot of highly controversial things.
It could be that played a role in what's happened here. And presumably the people that are receiving this cancellation of debt by Uncle Sam, they're going to be quite grateful for that, and they'll be inclined to vote for the Democratic Party. And the $500 billion will be passed on to other taxpayers, including ones that decided I'm not going to college, or I'm going to pay the debt back, or for whatever reason.
Or those who have finished paying their debt back.
Yeah, that's right. That's quite assaultive, isn't it?
Yes.
They've paid their debt back, and then they're going to be taxed to pay the debt back for other people.
Yes.
So it's quite a conundrum, and I would say this: I'll sail the ship into this issue. You mentioned the power of I guess rules, or some of the crevices of the way the Congress passes laws. Generally, these laws are tightened up by an agency that makes rules, and these rule-making agencies really have extraordinary power and just push the limits for whatever Congress passed. And I think this may be playing a role in this conversation. And we want to talk about any of that.
The courts do tend to be somewhat reluctant to look over the shoulders of these regulatory agencies too much. I mean, there's been some talk in recent years about the Chevron doctrine coming out of the famous Chevron case that in certain circumstances gives the bureaucracy a lot of autonomy in determining what their own rules are. This was a big selling point of the Republicans. I think when Trump was elected, either Trump or some people like him were saying we need to pass a law that says for every regulation that gets promulgated, we're going to take one or two off the books and try to get this bloated bureaucracy under control. But yeah, ultimately it is a third branch of government, and day to day, it at least theoretically operates under the president. And it's very odd because on the one hand, you want it responsive to the will of the people, but on the other hand, being unelected specialists who presumably know more about what they're doing than the average person in the street, how much oversight can you practically get there? I mean, who really ought to ultimately make the decision?
So now, if I can complain about this slightly, I think there's so-called silo thinking. In other words, you're a rule maker. You have a nice little sinecure in somewhere, Washington, a nice little office. You can look out. You get a lot of benefits. You can, take time off, nice pension. And you look out the window and say, I wonder what rule I'll make today. And my job, let's say, is to make sure that car tires are okay. And I'm going to really, really, really chomp down on car tires. And I've made a rule to make sure these car tires are 100% well. It turns out when that happens, that it's almost impossible to obtain these car tires,
Yes.
and it increases the cost of whatever. So people that drive to work can't get their cars won't, they can't get in a car anymore. So transportation is crippled, the country goes down. And the question to be asked is, who regulates the regulators? Who's going to, and there are thousands and thousands of rules being propagated. Maybe you've seen the deal about how the national debt is increasing. I would like to see something that shows the number of rules that are being put in there, and it's very difficult.
There's probably something out there that will tabulate that.
That would be
you,
interesting
yes.
to see as you drive into town. You see the rules going up.
Yes.
But how are these rules expunged? Who is it that watches over the whole deal? Because there's so many agencies out there making rules, and we're sort of in the conversation about student debt, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this turns out to be something that's so huge. It's made its way to the Supreme Court. It's a big deal. And certainly there's a lot of you'd like for people to not be as nice as you could be to them in general. And if they've pursued an education, one wishes to be nice to them. But the story may be, it may be against society's best interest to do this. But how many rules are out there that are not so obviously examined?
I couldn't even begin to tell you. I mean, I can tell you where to find them. I'm sure there's a statistician out there somewhere who probably has a running total of these rules. But it is mind-boggling. It truly is. So to the point that it is probably, as a practical matter, impossible for anyone to live his or her life today in the United States without violating some law or other in a 24-hour period.
And so these rules are just passed. I mean, I won't. And who knows who puts them there? I'll just say one hospital event took place. A bereaved family wanted to see their expiring relative. And the rule was there, only 4 people can come into the room at any one time. And that they could do that in ab seriatim fashion, but tops. Only 4 people can ever see the departing loved one. Not 5, not 6. You can't say, this is your, and the rule just seems on its face far in excess of what common sense would want. Yet these rules are there, and there are just zillions of them that have a contrary impact on the agility of our country.
But think how happy it makes your compliance officer down there at the hospital. Yeah, I mean, that's job security.
Yes, that's right. That's true. So there's so many rules out there. There are compliance officers that try and make you do that. Well, now the Supreme Court is going to pass make a decision about this, and the whole process is taking a long time. Allegedly, the latter part of June, we'll learn something. And if you owe the government money, or allegedly some people got some money back from the government, they may have to give it back, and there's all sorts of travail that's been generated by this act of political generosity by the president. And I mean, that appears to be the case. Do you have any thoughts about that? And you teach a lot of young people. Are you aware of people that are in this conundrum about?
Personally, I don't really talk to my students about this much for a couple of reasons. First of all, Middle Georgia State is, of course, a public college, which means it is funded by the state, which means the tuition rates, as these things go, are very, very low. So there's going to be less concern among our student population than among, say, Emory, for instance, to give an example. So that's one thing. Also, I have kind of the classical view of teaching. I'm a professor. I teach. I let all the red tape be handled by other departments.
Sounds like a good idea.
Yes. Well,
keep your mind clear. Right?
Well, to quote a philosopher from Boston College, Peter Kraft, who in turn quoted philosophy, Socrates' philosophy. Socrates, was always down on the sophists. He taught for the love of teaching,
Right.
right now, not to make money out of it. And so, to quote Kraft, Kraft once said, "I am a whore, and Boston College is my pimp." So the pimp just gets the the Johns and
Oh, is
Janes
that
in
right?
my door. I teach them, and I don't worry about it. So,
Well, that's pretty funny.
but yes, I mean it's a real world concern. But to play devil's advocate, if you've got all this money and invested, and the job market has just crashing all around you, not necessarily due to your own fault, just circumstances, then it could be very attractive to say loan forgiveness or loan cancellation in this circumstance. The market economist would say, well, the risk was on you. You decided to go into 14th century French literature, and if the market isn't there, then too bad.
It's not exactly a profit center, is it?
No, it isn't. But so take that for what it's worth. I mean, who ought to bear the risk of some truly unforeseen economic problem that pops up in the market?
And I mean, if you're a young person, I mean, and you want to, and I think, as I understand it, a lot of the largesse of the government has been directed toward people without much affluence that get this money, and I think the way that it's being forgiven is tilted toward people whose economic circumstances do not make them prosperous.
Yes.
So all of that is going on. But if you're a young person, if these bereaved circumstances, you're 18 years old, and I want to go to college, I want to do this, sign here. And maybe the university encourages that. Maybe that's what happens. The college counselor says, this will be great for you. And then the other point about this is, I praise the university education, as far as integrating oneself into the economic world. I mean, there's a lot of criticism for that. You mentioned, I guess, 13th century, 14th century French poetry or French literature or whatever. A lot of, was that the Song of Roland was before?
Chanson de Roland.
Right, so, whatever. That's as far as I can take that. 14th century. Maybe I could take it further, but I won't right now. In any event, you may get some really arcane things to learn it. Well, are you really going to, is this going to help your economic circumstances when you go to the university and maybe you take, I don't know what, advanced algebra and maybe something on primitive dance or whatever people take. Maybe an English course. I mean, maybe that's fine. But is that really going to assist you in getting a job afterwards? And would it be better to, as some European countries do, they expand their apprentice arrangements? So it's a very respectable thing. And I think many countries grant prestige and pride of ownership to people that possess a skill, a working skill that can serve the community, and people can be paid for it. So I'm saying, is there not enough of that? And all the people that can't pay this money back, how did all this happen? How did you not be able to pay the money back, and it's such a burden on you? And
yes, well, from here, we're getting into the purpose of education, and really for the great majority of human history, the great majority of certainly of higher education, it wasn't tied in directly to this will make me a more marketable resource and give me better income. It was an essay in the humanities about learning simply how to think critically, and which could profit you in any circumstance. In the last 20 to 30 to 40 years, the humanities as such have been just catching it into the teeth because
there's no money there.
There's no money there, and according to the net technocrats, it does nothing to prepare you for a world and a job in an industrial, post-industrial society. So I suppose, of course, by doing this, we would have to turn still more power over to these unelected specialist bureaucrats. You could come up with some sort of handicapping system on a scale of 1 to 10. This major is most likely to land you a good job and contribute to the economy.
People do that. I mean, chemical engineering is much better than, I don't know, Shakespeare.
Yeah, exactly. So,
for money purposes.
Yeah, and then you could allocate the risk, saying, okay, if you insist on going into 14th century French literature, then the chance of a bailout is going to be much smaller because you need to go into this with your eyes open.
Right.
So, but yeah, and from there we can spin off completely into, for instance, what's going on down in Florida and controlling books in libraries, and when the registered voter has input, into, when he's on the hook for paying for the books in the library, to what degree does he get to decide what books are going to be in the library? So,
Well, all right, Buck, I think it's been once again an elevated conversation tonight, and we'll talk some more. So thank you for being here. Let's go forth.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves. Endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.